Stanley was sitting in a small cafe in Kyiv, watching the dawn break over the city. Yesterday he returned from the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Thoughts about what he saw were still raging in his head. He reflected on the terrible consequences of the disaster and meeting with people who witnessed those events. Chernobyl left a deep mark on his soul, and he will always remember this experience. However, as a journalist, he knew that his work did not end with one story. The world is big, and there are many other places in it, each of which has its own story, its own legends, waiting for someone to tell them. His next destination is Lviv, a city that many call the heart of Western Ukraine. Lviv is famous for its culture, architecture, mysterious legends, and, of course, coffee. Leaving Kyiv, Stanley felt mixed emotions. He understood that each new chapter of his travels would reveal new facets of Ukrainian life and culture. The train heading west seemed to plunge him into a new story, and Stanley was ready to find out what Lviv had in store for him. Taking his place in the carriage, he felt a slight excitement, as if the city was already calling him to itself. Memories of Chernobyl had not yet subsided, but Lviv was already beginning to form a new picture in his imagination. A picture of a city that lives on its culture and history, a city where every stone can tell its own legend. Arriving at the Lviv railway station, Stanley was impressed by the magnificent architecture of the building, which greeted him with its massiveness and ancient beauty. The station was like a gate to another world, a world where time slowed down and allowed to immerse yourself in the atmosphere of past centuries. Lviv met him in a quiet morning, when the streets had not yet woken up, and the air was cool and fresh. From the first look at the city, Stanley felt that there was a different atmosphere than in Kyiv. Stone streets, architecture that preserved traces of different eras, and numerous coffee shops, where a special atmosphere of coziness and peace was felt. All this created a feeling as if he was in a city that lives by its own laws. Walking through the quiet streets, he decided to find a place where he can drink coffee and try to understand what this city is all about. On one of the streets, he noticed a small cafe with a terrace, where an elderly man was sitting at a table, engrossed in reading a newspaper. Stanley decided this was a great opportunity to strike up a conversation with a local to learn more about the city. He approached the table where the man was sitting and politely asked if he could join him. The elderly man raised his head, smiled, and gestured for Stanley to sit down. "Sure, sit down," he said. "My name is Bohdan. I've lived here all my life, and I see you're not local? Do you travel?" "Yes, I'm a journalist. I came back from a trip to Chernobyl and decided to visit your city to learn more about it," answered Stanley, ordering himself a coffee. Chernobyl. This is a place that has left its mark in the souls of many people. But Lviv is a completely different story. Here, in every stone, every street, its own legend is hidden, and the city will gladly share them with those who want to hear them, answered Bohdan, slightly nodding his head. Stanley felt that this conversation could become the key to understanding the city, and decided to devote the following days to his acquaintance with the legends and traditions of Lviv. Lviv is a city where the past and the present are intertwined into one invisible knot, where every house, every street can tell a story that lives in the hearts of its residents. Walking through the ancient streets, Stanley felt how the city was gradually revealing its secrets to him, as if it had invited him into its magical world, where sometimes not only real events but also legends passed down from generation to generation rule. Bohdan, an elderly man whom he met in a coffee shop, became a kind of guide for him in this mysterious city. Together they went for a walk through the streets of Lviv, where every corner was filled with stories. "You know," Bohdan began, as they passed by an old house with windows decorated with carved lattices, "there once lived a famous Lviv apothecary. But it's not that he was an apothecary. The important thing is that he knew more than simply curing diseases. People say that he possessed the secrets of alchemy and could even turn ordinary substances into gold." Stanley listened with interest, feeling the legend of the apothecary come to life in his imagination. He imagined how flasks with strange liquids were boiling in the dark basement of this house, and the apothecary himself, immersed in his experiments, was looking for the philosopher's stone. "But that's not all," Bohdan continued. In the same house after his death, no one could live long. People said that the apothecary's soul had not found rest, and he was still looking for something in his rooms, trying to finish his work. So the house stood empty for many years, until finally was not destroyed. And this is just one of the many legends of Lviv. In each of these buildings there is a story that is waiting for someone who wants to hear it. Bogdan concluded, stopping in front of another ancient building. Stanley felt as if he were opening the pages of a large book, each chapter dedicated to a specific part of the city. He understood that these stories are not just fiction, but important parts of the city's culture that make Lviv so special. Bogdan told him about the legends that were preserved in the people's memory, and Stanley became more and more immersed in this world, feeling how the city slowly revealed its secrets. Each new street, each house became for him not just objects to observe, but parts of living history, which he tried to understand and record in his notes. They continued their walk through the city, and Bogdan talked about other interesting places, such as the old university, where rare books are stored, or about the dungeons under Rhinox Square, where, according to legends, the treasures of ancient rulers are hidden. Stanley felt that these legends were more than just interesting stories. They were a living part of the city, a reflection of its soul. He understood that Lviv is not only architectural monuments and cultural events. This is a city where legends become reality, where the past and the present intertwine, creating a unique flavor. After this walk, Stanley decided that the next day he would continue his acquaintance with the city, but on his own. He wanted to experience Lviv alone, without a guide, allowing himself to simply wander its streets and immerse himself in the atmosphere of the city. The next day, Stanley went to the very heart of the city, where the streets were narrow and the houses seemed to be pressed tightly together, forming a labyrinth of stone structures. The feeling that every turn could reveal a new story before him never left him. In search of an interesting story, he came across a small courtyard where a group of men were busy playing chess. Their appearance and manner of communication immediately reminded him of the legendary Lviv Batyars, carefree street boys who are known for their witty humor, love of life, and, of course, the ability to get out of the water dry in any situation. One of the men, noticing Stanley's curiosity, approached him and, with a faint smile, asked, "Don't you want to hear a story about a real Batyar? The one only told in a small circle." Stanley readily agreed, realizing that this could be another key to understanding the city. The man, who called himself Andrei, invited him to sit on the bench next to him and began his story. It was in those days when Lviv was not yet the same as it is now. The streets here were much more dangerous, and the law could not always reach all corners of the city. In those days there lived a Batyar named Misko. He was well known in all of Lviv for his witty antics and incredible ability to get out of any situation without a single scratch. Misko was neither a thief nor a swindler. He simply loved life and had his own code of honor, which he followed unconditionally. Andrei told how Misko, together with his friends, liked to walk the streets of the city, make unexpected acquaintances, and participate in various adventures. He was a master of jokes and knew how to cheer up even in the saddest moments. But, apart from that, he was known for his justice and always stood up for the weak. One day, when a large fair was held in Lviv, where people gathered from all over Ukraine, Misko decided that it was a great opportunity to show his skills and have a little fun. He offered his friend a pair to walk through the fair without paying for any goods, but in such a way that no one would be offended and would not notice the ruse. Stanley listened as Andrei talked about how Misko, using his charming humor and sharp mind, resorted to tricks that allowed him to get what he wanted without any harm to others. He collected apples as if helping the seller, exchanged them for candies, and then the candies for other treats, and he did all this in such a way that people even thanked him for his help. Andrei ended the story by saying that when Misko returned home, it turned out that he had collected a basket full of various goodies. But none of the sellers felt cheated. He had his own special approach to people, and although his actions could be called cunning, everyone knew that Misko was not doing anything wrong. Stanley realized that stories like Misko's weren't just fiction. They reflect the special spirit of the city and its inhabitants, their ability to see the positive in life, even in the most difficult situations. Lviv Batyars became for him a symbol of that part of the city that lives in every corner, in every smile of local residents. Andriy added that even today, although times have changed, the spirit of Batyar still lives in Lviv. It is embodied in the love of freedom, loyalty to one's principles, and, of course, in an incredible sense of humor that makes life brighter and easier. Stanley decided that he must research even more such stories, because they help to understand not only the city, but also its soul, that special atmosphere that can be felt only in Lviv. Stanley continued his journey through Lviv, this time deciding to explore its famous coffee culture. He heard a lot about Lviv coffee shops, where each has its own special atmosphere and style. Coffee is not just drunk here. Here it becomes part of a ritual that combines the enjoyment of taste, aromas, and conversations. Having decided to start his day with coffee, Stanley went to one of the oldest coffee shops in the city, which was located on a small street near the market square. The interior of this cafe preserved the spirit of past centuries. Wooden furniture, old paintings on the walls, dimmed lamplight created a special, almost magical atmosphere. Stanley ordered himself a cup of black coffee and, taking the first sip, felt the drink fill him with warmth and energy. He thought about how coffee shops became an integral part of Lviv culture. Here people meet, discuss news, share stories, and each such meeting has its own unique atmosphere. A middle-aged woman sat down next to him, who, as it turned out, had been working in this coffee shop for many years. She turned to Stanley with a smile. "I see you are new to our town. How do you like our coffee?" Stanley replied that he was impressed by the quality and taste of the coffee, and this prompted the woman to share the story about the coffee shop. This coffee shop is one of the oldest in Lviv. It has its own special history. Famous people once met here: writers, musicians, artists. They came here not only for coffee, but also to find inspiration, share their thoughts, and create something new. They say that one of the most famous Lviv songs was written right here at this table. Stanley was fascinated by the story and asked if there are other similar places in the city where you can feel the atmosphere of old Lviv. The woman smiled and answered, "There are many such coffee shops in Lviv. Each of them has its own history, its own legend. You can visit the Golden Ducat, where coffee is roasted according to ancient recipes, or the Vermenka, where artists meet and discuss about art." Stanley decided that he would spend the following days visiting these places, learning the stories and legends that these coffee houses hold. He understood that Lviv is not only a city with a rich history, but also a place where you can find something special in every detail, in every sip of coffee. He felt that every cup of coffee he drank in a Lviv coffee shop opened a new page of the city's history for him, and he was ready to discover these pages for himself, exploring and enjoying every moment of his stay in Lviv. Rynok Square is the heart of Lviv, where history and modernity intersect, where every corner keeps its secrets and secrets. Stanley decided to spend the whole day exploring this square, because he knew that here, like nowhere else, you could feel the true spirit of the city. Starting his walk from the town hall, he could not help but admire the beauty of the ancient buildings surrounding the square. Each house here had its own special style, its own history. Some of them belonged to rich merchants, others to famous artists or scientists. Stanley was sure that behind every facade there was some interesting story hidden. Suddenly, a young guy who offered tours of the city approached him. He introduced himself as Andrew and asked if Stanley would like to hear some of the most interesting stories about Market Square. The journalist agreed, feeling that this could be a great opportunity to learn something new. "You know," Andrei began when they approached one of the houses. "Here in this house once lived a famous doctor from Lviv. He was known not only for his medical knowledge, but also for the fact that he knew the secrets of folk medicine. People say that he could cure even those diseases that seemed incurable." Stanley listened as Andrei talked about the doctor, about his unusual methods of treatment and how his fame spread far beyond the borders of Lviv. He imagined how consultations took place in this house, how the sick came with the hope of healing, and how the doctor used his knowledge to help them. Andrei also talked about other interesting places on the square, in particular the House of the Black House, where, according to legends, the secrets of alchemy are kept and where mysterious experiments once took place. Stanley was fascinated by how the history of the city was intertwined with legends, creating a unique flavor. They ended the tour at the fountain with the sculpture of Neptune, where Andrew told about interesting stories related to this place. The fountain, as it turned out, was a meeting place where residents of the city discussed the latest news and events. Stanley realized that Market Square is not just an architectural monument, but a living place where every stone, every detail has its own story. He felt that by spending time in the square, he became a part of this historical context, a part of a city that never ceases to surprise its guests. This day gave him the opportunity to immerse himself in the atmosphere of Lviv, to see it not only as a tourist center, but also as a city that lives its own life, where history and modernity harmoniously coexist, creating a unique flavor. The next day, Stanley decided to continue his journey through Lviv, this time focusing on Armenian Street, which many call the artistic center of the city. He heard that here you can find ancient churches, art galleries, and workshops where real masterpieces are created. The street greeted him with its unique atmosphere. Narrow sidewalks, old houses, each of which seemed to be a part of a great history. Armenian Street has always been a place where different cultures and traditions met, and this created a special atmosphere. The first thing that caught Stanley's attention was the Armenian church, one of the oldest in the city. Its architecture, which combined elements of Gothic and Armenian culture, impressed with its grandeur and at the same time comfort. Stanley decided to go inside to feel the atmosphere of the place. Inside the church there was silence and peace, and Stanley felt that this atmosphere seemed to envelop him, giving him the opportunity to think about the eternal and about the place of man in this world. He saw a woman praying in a corner under an ancient icon. Her calm expression indicated that this place was a source of strength and inspiration for her. After visiting the church, Stanley continued his walk, coming across a small art gallery. He went inside and was impressed by the variety of works on display. There were paintings, sculptures, and even works of modern art that demonstrated the richness and diversity of Lviv culture. The owner of the gallery, a middle-aged man, seeing Stanley's interest, approached him and began to talk about the works he was exhibiting. He spoke with such enthusiasm and passion that Stanley could not help but feel this love of art being transmitted to him. "There have always been many talented artists in Lviv," said the owner. "This city inspires. Its atmosphere, architecture, people. All this creates ideal conditions for creativity. Many of the works you see here were created precisely under the influence of Lviv's landscapes and stories." Stanley felt that Armenian Street is not just a part of the city, but a place where different cultures meet, where art becomes a bridge between the past and the present, between different traditions and views. This day allowed him to understand more deeply that Lviv is not only architectural monuments, but also a place where art lives and flourishes, where every artist finds inspiration in the city itself, in its legends and stories. Stanley decided that the next day he would visit another interesting part of Lviv to further immerse himself in the atmosphere of this unique city. Stanley couldn't shake the feeling that the town had another secret for him to uncover. All his previous meetings, conversations, and walks seemed to be part of some larger plan, an invisible force that guided his actions. The whole city seemed to be watching him, waiting for his next move. The last days in Lviv were spent in constant expectation of something unusual. The elusive atmosphere of the city, in which the past and the present were intertwined, created a feeling as if he was in a parallel reality, where every gesture, every word had a hidden meaning. Stanley understood that he was approaching a solution that could change his perception not only of Lviv, but also of everything that happened to him before that. That night, after a long day spent in the old quarters of the city, Stanley decided to return to his hotel room. But, being on the street, he suddenly realized that he was lost. The streets seemed unfamiliar to him, although he knew for sure that he had walked these roads before. But now everything looked completely different. It seemed that the city had changed. Feeling strangely uneasy, he stopped at an ancient house that looked as if it had been there since time immemorial. Its windows were closed with heavy curtains, and on the door could be seen a sign almost erased by time with some illegible inscription. It all looked as if the house was hiding its secrets from the outside world. Stanley felt an overwhelming urge to go inside. He climbed the creaky wooden stairs and knocked on the door. No answer. He pressed the handle and the door opened with a characteristic creak. It was dark and cold inside, but some invisible force pulled him on. He found himself in a great hall where the walls were decorated with ancient paintings and the ceiling rose high above his head, creating a feeling of endless space. Soft whispers filled the room, as if thousands of invisible voices were swirling in the air. He tried to make out the words, but they merged into an indecipherable hum. And suddenly he saw them, shadows moving around him. At first they seemed to him just a play of light, but with every minute their contours became clearer. They seemed like ghosts of the past that had come to life in this dark hall. Each shadow had its own shape, its own movements, but none of them had a face. Stanley felt his heart start to beat faster, but he couldn't look away. They seemed to him some kind of elusive creatures that exist on the border of light and shadow, between reality and fantasy. Every shadow was silent, but he felt that they knew everything about him. And in that moment he realized that these shadows are the memories of the city, its dark side that is never visible on the surface. They witnessed everything that happened in Lviv for centuries, and now they are ready to share their secrets. Suddenly, a man in ancient clothes came out from behind one of the walls. His face was hidden under the hood, but Stanley could sense that this stranger was waiting for him. The stranger did not say a word, but gestured for the journalist to follow him. They walked through several dark corridors until they found themselves in a small room with a single candle burning. The stranger motioned for him to sit down, and Stanley, in spite of his anxiety, felt obliged to obey. "You've been looking for answers," said the stranger, his voice sounding like a voice from the depths of the ages. "But be careful, because not every answer brings peace." Stanley listened as the man began to tell a story that was beyond human understanding. It was a story about ancient forces that had lived in the city since time immemorial. These forces influenced people's destinies, determined their path, pushed them to actions that seemed random. The stranger talked about how in the old days the city was full of mysticism. When people sought answers in the afterlife, they turned to spirits, to the forces of nature, to everything that could help them in their lives. But with this knowledge came great dangers. Stanley understood that this story was not only about the past, but also about the present. He saw the shadows around him begin to move faster, as if someone was about to release them. The stranger spoke of those who fell victim to these forces, who were lost in search of a truth that proved too difficult to grasp. Among these lost souls were people from different eras and different backgrounds. They searched for answers, but instead found an abyss that swallowed their souls. The shadows in the hall were those lost souls who could not find peace. Stanley felt a cold sweat run down his back. He understood that this stranger was showing him more than just a story, but something more, something that could change him forever. He saw how each shadow conveyed to him a part of its pain, its history, and he felt these emotions fill him. The stranger's story became more and more complicated, but at the same time more detailed. Stanley understood that he touched the very essence of Lviv, that part of the city that was hidden from the eyes of ordinary people. He learned about conspiracies, about lost secrets, about what was always present in Lviv, but no one dared to talk about it. Time seemed to stand still. Each word of the stranger was saturated with mystical power, and Stanley felt how they penetrated his consciousness, leaving unforgettable traces. He could feel how this mysterious man was slowly revealing to him the true essence of the city. This city is alive. It breathes, feels, lives its life. But it also keeps its secrets, continued the stranger. And these secrets will only be revealed to those willing to pay for them. Are you ready? Stanley knew that this question needed no answer. He had already made this decision when he set foot on Lviv soil. He was ready to learn the truth, even if it meant facing his own fears and doubts. Stanley left the mysterious house, leaving behind ghostly shadows and voices of the past. But the feeling of incompleteness did not leave him. The night air was cool and refreshing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something invisible, elusive, was accompanying him. Lviv, this charming city with an eternal history, seemed to be trying to say something, show something. And now Stanley felt that he was on the verge of something extremely important. The city looked different, as if every street, every house had its own eyes, its own mouth that whispered its own stories. But now these stories had a different shade, a deeper meaning. They were not just a backdrop for people's lives. They were life itself. Lviv opened up to Stanley in all its grandeur, but also in its tragedy. He walked through the streets, which now seemed endless, not having a specific route, but feeling that he was being guided by some invisible force. Everywhere he went, he saw images, shadows of the past, which were reflected in the present. Each person, each encounter seemed to be a part of this huge mosaic that he was trying to assemble. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw an old woman sitting on a bench near one of the houses. Her eyes, full of wrinkles and wisdom, looked into the distance, as if she saw something that was hidden from others. She looked up at Stanley, and he felt that this meeting was inevitable. "You're looking for answers," she said, her voice soft but deep. "But not all answers will bring you peace. Sometimes it's better to let the past be the past." Stanley felt his heart sink at the words. He had heard similar things from a stranger in the house before, but now it sounded different. It was as if fate itself had warned him of the danger that could come from excessive curiosity. "I know," he replied, sitting down next to her. "But I have to know. It's more than just curiosity. It's my mission." The old woman smiled, but her smile was sad, as if she already knew the answer to his question. Lviv is not just a city. It is a living organism. It absorbs the souls of those who try to unravel its secrets. Many came here hoping to find answers, but found only shadows and memories that haunt them. Stanley felt his throat tighten. He understood that this woman knew more than she was saying. She was part of this mystery, part of this story. And maybe she was the one who could help him complete his journey. "Tell me your story," he asked. "I want to know what happened here and why all these shadows are haunting me." The old woman sighed and looked into the distance again. "This story began many years ago when I was still young. Then Lviv was different, but at the same time the same. People always came here in search of something. Some were looking for wealth, others for knowledge, others for salvation. But not everyone found what they were looking for. Sometimes the city gave them more than they could handle." She paused as if remembering something important. "I was also among them. I was looking for the truth. I wanted to know why my life turned out the way it was. And I found answers. But these answers did not bring me happiness. They only opened the door to another world, a world that I could not understand." Stanley listened intently, feeling her words fill his mind with new questions. "And what happened next? I met people who were also looking for answers. We became a part of this city, its history. But over time, I realized that we were not just seekers. We became keepers of these secrets, guardians of what should not have been revealed." She looked at him, and he saw deep sadness in her eyes. "Now I'm old, and I want this story to end. But I can't do it alone. You're the one who can end this journey. You can find the answers I couldn't find." Stanley understood that this was the moment of truth. He came to Lviv to find stories, but he found something more. He found his way, his vocation. And now he understood that his mission was not only to record these stories, but also to help these souls find peace. "I will do my best," he replied, and the old woman smiled. "Thank you," she said. "Now I can go in peace." She rose from the bench and slowly walked away, leaving Stanley alone in the empty street. He sat there for a long time, pondering her words. He understood that his journey was just beginning, that many discoveries and trials lay ahead of him. But he was ready. He knew that Lviv had revealed his secrets to him, and now he had to tell these stories to the world. He stood up and, with one last look at the city, walked on, knowing that his journey was not yet complete. Lviv was left behind, but it will always be a part of his life. And Stanley knew that one day he would return here to find the last pieces of this great puzzle. But that will be another story that has been waiting to be told. If you are interested in stories, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss interesting stories from Storytelling World.